Welcome to The Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. Unprecedented is a remarkable collection of exclusive first-person stories on leadership during the COVID-19 pandemic from 29 chief executives at iconic Canadian companies. In this second and final part of a two-part series, I speak with the one and only Michael Medline, CEO of Sobeys, one of the retail leaders contributing to this necessary book for our times and the times ahead. I take Michael back to the very early days of the COVID era, and then we progress forward through key management lessons learned for the future and his perspectives around the future for modern business and what he calls a kinder and distinctly Canadian capitalism. Let's listen in now. Well, Michael, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Well, it's such a treat. You and I have known each other. We've met a few times, more than a few times, through the Retail Council of Canada, and now I get to have you on the podcast. So welcome.
It's good being here. You've got a great voice for podcasts.
Thank you. All right, well, let's jump right in. First of all, for the folks who are international, there's not many Canadians who wouldn't have heard the name or certainly wouldn't know or would know Sobeys. But for the international audience, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what you do at Empire.
You know, I made a career mistake at the beginning, was a lawyer, and then I decided to go into business, and I haven't looked back. I've loved it, and my claim to fame, which I don't even know if it's true, is that I'm the only person to lead a hard goods, soft goods, and a grocery company. Anyone on the line who has another credit to that, I apologize, and they can call me.
Good trifecta. You've done the trifecta, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I always wanted to do grocery because grocers always look down their nose on hard goods and soft goods retailers. Because they said, look, our stuff can go bad and die, and it's much harder. Yeah. But there are unbelievable similarities in retail between the three areas. Yeah, and I was just going to say, I've been at Empire Company Sobeys, which we have a lot of banners, and I'm not going to repeat them all in here, for 5.5 years, and loved every minute of it.
And you went to Sobeys at a particular time, and we should call it Empire. I guess most people know it as Sobeys, but Empire is the kind of the broader company based in Stellarton that under which is the umbrella of all these companies. So tell us just a little bit about the scope and scale of the business, again, just for some context for those.
Yeah, it's a big business, like a lot of big grocers. We're the second largest retailer in the country, and we have about 2,000 retail outlets, and we have businesses. Mostly grocery, right? But fuel, pharmacy, liquor, and we also recently purchased or partnered with Farm Boy and Longo's over the last few years. So we continue to get bigger and better, but it's a very large company, and also we've added on the Ocado partnership, and we have the best e-commerce grocery in the country, and our Voila platform that we continue to grow out.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that a little bit later, and what that was like, because you'd already broken ground on Voila and done the deal, but then COVID happened, so then that was a whole other thing. And hey, listen, I'm talking to you. I'm actually live at the Restaurants Canada trade show, and I'm seeing on the floor. It's very, you mentioned Farm Boy, and Farm Boy's got that kind of grocerant thing going. Amazing pizza oven. I'm seeing lots of plant-based foods, lots of innovative foods from across Canada, lots of automation. Are you seeing the same thing in your side of the business, so to speak? They're close cousins, of course, but are you seeing those same kind of things presented to the merchants and demanded from or asked for from customers?
Yeah, I think that we're seeing now innovation emerging even stronger than before the pandemic. Look, during COVID, we just had, everyone just tried to do their business and go along. But I'm seeing huge growth in innovative products and services. And the only concern I have is that some of these services are to take people out of the stores. And we got to be really careful with that, because I think people are the key to serving customers, obviously. And innovation's cool in the store, but it's our people who, before, during, and after the pandemic have served Canadians, and they do the best job. So we're very cautious in terms of, because it's a tight labor market, and we face that. But boy, are we ever looking for good people? And if there are ways to make their jobs easier and better, then we certainly are looking for that innovation.
I had the opportunity to talk to Jeff York, who actually I went to high school with, a little fun factoid, from Farm Boy. And we were talking about, that greeting at the checkout right? That human greeting, the human greetings at the cheese stand, like how important that was, particularly I think in grocery. Let's talk about. So we're here actually to talk. The listeners would have already had the opportunity to hear my interview with one of the co-authors, Andrew Willis, from Unprecedented, Canada's top CEOs on leadership during COVID-19. So before we kind of jump in on what your thoughts were and what you articulated in your piece, how did you get involved in the project? What why'd you decide to do it? You're not someone who has a lot of free time with a big sprawling enterprise. Why did it appeal to you as something you should participate in?
Well, it's a funny story about that, and I'll get to that. But I think two reasons. One is I really have a lot of respect for Steve Mayer and Andrew Willis, who co-produced the book, co-authored it. And so when they asked, I probably wasn't going to say no. The second reason is that I think that at the backstages of the pandemic and even going on now, that there's a misunderstanding of capitalism and the corporation's role throughout the pandemic and in society in general. And so I thought, and maybe this will have a very little effect on that, but any effect we could have would be important because I think it's completely misrepresented. But it was funny because I'd already really written the chapter in a way. I can't even remember how far into the pandemic, but it'd been about 10 or 11 months into the pandemic. I couldn't get into Atlantic Canada to see my great teammates and the Sobey family and our great chairman, Jim Dixon, and I couldn't see our stores. And I couldn't feel the Atlantic region because we had the Atlantic bubble up.
Right,
and so then I thought to myself, well, I got to get out there. So I went and quarantined for 2 weeks and did my work, even though I wasn't sick or anything like that. But there was that bubble that people, if you remember. And I decided I had nothing to do at night other than watch sports, which I did. And I decided to write my memoirs up to that moment, just for my own sake, on our experiences at Empire and my personal experiences and how proud I was of our people, especially our great leaders and frontline leaders. And so I wrote that out. And then we got this request from Steve and Andrew and to do Unprecedented. And so I handed over my rough notes to our great Jacqueline Weatherby, who's head of communications. She looked at them and said, there's a few paragraphs you should never have in print there because they're a little too stark in terms of your feelings on certain things about parliamentary inquiries and things.
Yeah, that was a surrealistic experience for all of us. I'm sure it was for you.
That was a bizarro world for me. Yeah. And so, but it didn't take much, and Jacqueline helped me edit it, and we published the chapter. And I think that I've read through the other chapters by other CEOs, and I think there's commonality. And I think there was a lot to learn. I learned a lot reading about it, about others, and as I said, I think that not all companies distinguish themselves. I'm not going to say they did. Yeah, but so many did. So many did.
One of my last questions for Andrew when I interviewed him about the book is I said, after going through this journey and listening to folks like yourself, does it change your reporting? Do you have a different perspective on things? And he talked about how he had I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he basically had a greater appreciation for how complex, business is, how many things need to go right for something as simple as, a jug of milk to show up on a shelf. So I think, I think collectively you've all achieved that from a pretty experienced veteran business writer. So I think that's in and of itself is a pretty good thing, I think.
Oh, that's really nice to hear.
Let's rewind back to the really early days of the COVID crisis. I mean, I was there, as you know, I write a report for Retail Counsel. So I had the privilege, every quarter talking to a lot of CEOs, and already the spidey senses were tingling for everybody. It was kind of Jan-Feb. It was more a little bit like, boy, this would be not so good in supply chain, and boy, the tourists aren't going to come here. And then when did it start to dawn on you? Because you have similar connections, a vast array of vendors and inputs. When did it start to dawn on you the kind of order of magnitude of what we're about to undergo?
It was pretty early. I think that we were watching China with great apprehension, but we were all hoping that this would be contained, and we didn't really know too much, and there wasn't a lot of information, but we were concerned. Then you saw what was going on in Italy, and then you knew it was creeping toward us, and you saw New York. But so we declared, there was some ridiculous debate we had about whether this was a state of emergency for the company, which would invoke all sorts of protocols, including
business continuity stuff.
Yeah, daily meetings.
You have to go in a bunker, right? You'd have to go underground to a bunker or something, right?
Well, I actually did work out of a basement for too long a period of time. But and then we declared it very, very early and put great leaders in charge. But for me, when it really came, for me being a sports fan, what really happened was when Rudy Gobert, after his game with the Raptors got pulled off and NBA shut down, then all the pro sports leagues shut down.
That's serious. Now it's serious. Now it's serious.
Now we have nothing. Now I have nothing to watch, and boy, this is real. But in our business, it wasn't. We were never going to close down.
Right.
Although we were, and I think that there is a lack of understanding how close we were, maybe, and we never hit anything, but we were close to the edge on supply chain. Yeah, and we were close to the edge in terms of PPE. And you go, how could that be? There wasn't enough disinfectant, so to go around. Yeah, and we have certain obvious standards that we can't operate a store without those. And who came to our rescue? Businesses that were in trouble and had to close their doors, like Cineplex and MLSE. Which those of you in other countries run the Leafs and the Raptors, among other teams. And we were able to beg and borrow from other companies to be able to get through very tough times until we could get our the output that we needed. And that was a stunning revelation to see how even, imagine running Cineplex and you just got closed down and you don't know what's going to happen and you're on the phone with me and helping out. That will stick with me forever.
Yeah, so interesting. I mean, I had a long, great discussion with Roger Martin, who you might remember from Rotman. Well, he's got as you might know, he's got a great book, and he posits that we've come too close to just in time, right? That we're now, $1 million of storage cost on PPE would have saved us $1 billion of flights, kind of too close to the line. It seemed to me that there is a big point at which I was more comfortable that we were going to get through it on the food side when. I know the Retail Council was involved in just making sure the borders would stay open, right? The flow of goods. Was that a big milestone for you as well? Yeah.
And it sounds crazy now, but our leaders and Jacqueline and I spent so much time talking to the governments. And by the way, so much of public health and governments were so helpful. The premiers and the provinces, and they were doing everything they could do. But not everyone has an appreciation for every aspect of your own business, okay?
Right.
And just like I don't have appreciation for everyone else's business. And so a lot of education had to go into, those borders shut and it's winter. There's no fresh food. There's no fruit. There's no vegetables.
Yeah.
And that sounds unbelievable, but we were worried at the time that certain decisions would be made out of prudence. Okay. I'm not saying out of any bad intent that could really hurt Canadians.
Yeah. Big unintended consequences, right?
Right? And when you don't understand things and you start messing with them. But, and I think that, there were some decisions that, in retrospect were kind of silly and probably didn't allow businesses to go. But some of the decisions, like allowing us to deliver products to our stores at hours that we normally wouldn't be able to do, and just the support we had from public health and from the provinces across the country. Really helped us in the end. It wasn't an impediment to doing business. And I think we all learned a lot about each other and our appreciation. And there's certain parts of government and politics I'm quick to judge, but there were a lot of great parts of it. And I hope that, that how our business operates and how business and government can, be judges of each other, but still try to work together for the good of Canadians. I hope to God that continues.
Yeah, no kidding. You talk about plexiglass. I often joke that it would have been the only good job to have was the plexiglass salesperson. You guys, you lifted heaven and you must have made a quick decision on that because it just started happening, right? You talk about that in the book. So share a little bit about that particular story because I think it illustrates kind of a point I wanted to get to, which is, sometimes in large companies, decision-making is complex, but it seemed to be very streamlined. And I've talked to CEOs said, boy, I don't miss the COVID era, the heat of it, but I do wish that we continue with that agility around decision making? Like how fast did it surprise you that the organization could galvanize itself that quickly?
Yes, it did. And I do. And, we challenge each other now. How come we could do that 2 years ago? And why is this taking so long? And, and then we say, oh, well, there's risk, there's process.
Yeah. Right.
But here we had nowhere close to 100% data, and we were making lightning quick decisions, and we were making them for the right priorities. And I can't think of too many decisions we made that I have any regrets for. And it's plexiglass is kind of the one I use as an example because, well, what's more Canadian than plexiglass, right? Like we all think of, the plexiglass in the hockey arenas. And what's so funny, you just said that you wish you could be a plexiglass, but I'm on a call with global grocery leaders. And just not a lot of them, like 6 or 8 of them. And it's hard to understand everyone's accents, and the lines were bad at that time. And suddenly I hear this person from Italy talking about plexiglass. So it wasn't my idea. We're not proud in retail. We'll steal good ideas. Right. And I thought, geez, that's good. That could really work. And before the call hung up, I was texting. As I often do too often on calls. And I texted our team and I said, we're going to do this. Let's do it. And we had no idea of the cost or the logistics. And we called a plexiglass company, which had just shut their doors the day before because who was buying plexiglass?
Yeah, we're done.
And they reopened. And for a very short period of time, we cornered the market on plexiglass. And we bought every piece of plexiglass there was.
Crazy
and
story.
The next day, within 24 hours, we had set it up in a couple of stores in the GTA so that we could see it. It was great. Our people felt safer. The customers felt safer. And we rolled it. In 3 weeks, we had it everywhere in the country, including putting plexiglass on planes to get it to Newfoundland, Western Canada, where there was a plexiglass shortage. And if we helped, people not get sick or maybe a few people not get really sick, it was all the while worth it. I now know what it cost, and but who cared? We weren't in it for money or profits back then. We were an essential service and continue to be so.
And fed the nation. COVID's been called the great accelerator. I guess the poster child for that is certainly e-commerce, and within that, grocery e-commerce. Now, you had already broken ground on Voilà, but talk about, Dr. Sylvain Charlebois and I have a podcast. We had Sarah Joyce on the podcast. We talked about it, and this was pre-COVID. So the wheels were already in motion, but then suddenly you had to not just stand that up, but make big decisions and accelerate. Talk about that experience, about rising to that.
Yeah, and I take very low credit for that. That's the team at Voilà and everyone supporting them here at our company and the great leadership of Sarah Joyce. I would say that it was very difficult to get something off the ground while in the total midst and depths of the biggest public health crisis I hope we'll ever face. And Sarah and her team just put their heads down and we opened it in that dark period and early and not at the same standard we wanted to open at, to be honest, because we could serve Canadians. And so right now, Voilà is running around 20,000 SKUs in the Ontario region. And it'll get up above 30,000. But when we opened, It was 7,000. And so we wouldn't open with 7,000 normally, but those 7,000 SKUs could feed a lot of people. And they were the SKUs that most people were looking for. And so we opened and I can't remember any operational issues that these people somehow opened this with no operational issues and with customer satisfaction scores that are the highest I've ever seen. So, and they continue to be. So, if you're listening to this, you should try Voilà. But boy, at the beginning of the pandemic, that was really something and was a credit to our team. And
it's for a different discussion, maybe in a different episode, but you once described that as one of those very rare projects that you just greenlit almost right away. And now you're expanding. I was in Montreal at the CL show and I drove by a big warehouse. Is that the Voilà warehouse in Montreal?
Yeah. We can't we're expanding it as quickly as we can. I've never seen an answer like the Ocado answer, which is why every country, the retailers bid to get it and negotiate that they're the ones that Ocado wants to partner with. And so, many countries already tied up, including France, United States, Great Britain, and Asian countries. But yeah, that's something I just don't know what plan B is other than at the store pick. And, I'm going to throw some bouquets, which is our competitors did a great job meeting the need of Canadians throughout the crisis as well. And it wasn't just Empire Company and Sobeys. Our competitors did a superb job. I thought the industry was phenomenal, and that the supplier partners who had it the worst, I think, and the transportation companies, it just showed you that the whole thing could work. It was hanging by a thread, but it hung. And but it's not. I'm not just saying Empire did a good job. I think almost everyone did a great job to support Canada.
It's a bit of an artificial construct here for you, but I'm a fan of Dan Pink, and he's got a book, Power of Regret. Do you have any regrets from that time? Any decisions that you said, looking back, you would have done something different? Knowing, I guess it's an artificial construct, because knowing now, knowing then what you know now is just completely artificial. But anything you would have done differently? No, I mean that's and I do understand the power of regret, and I do think back on things in my career or life that I could have done better, and so I'm not against regret or looking back. I just don't know how we could have done more, especially in the darkest days. And yeah, there are things you could have done a little better, or maybe a day quicker. I'd say if I have regrets at all, it's that and it's more of a wish or a concern, is that what you mentioned earlier is why can't we continue to, in the right way, unify rather than divide? Why can't we work better together instead of carping all the time at each other or trying to steal from each other's pie instead of making the pie bigger for Canadians? Was that the power of it struck me that everyone had, during COVID, a unifying mission, right? There was generally, everyone was, rowing in the same direction, right? Because everyone had the mission. And I feel like that's starting to slip. Yeah, I think that you always think that things are going to change and change for the better and change for good. And I do think that a lot of good came out of that. I do believe that Canadian companies will be better run now, that they'll think of society in a greater way, and that they'll be more agile. And, I'll give you an example instead of being general. We had some terrible catastrophes and weather events, especially in Canada, over the last year especially. And if you look at what happened in British Columbia with the floods or the fires in different spots. Sure. And all the learnings we had from the beginning of pandemic and the new systems and processes and disciplines we put in helped us get through that and be able to supply to the communities in need. I don't think we could have done that without having changed the way we do business. So I think we're better off today. A more resilience, and I think organizational resilience, right? I mean, it feels like, we clearly don't know what can come next. COVID taught us that, but I guess the idea is the difference between how well you're planned out and how agile you can be in the face of, whatever comes next, right? Yeah, and I completely agree with that. I think that the leaders who have had to go through that, and especially I think that the younger people in a company and the younger leaders are going to be far better than the current crop like me, because of what they had to see and learn and how they had to work together as a team. And I think we got great leaders going to be coming up that's where they would have been forged. Right. And that's going to make them very, very strong. It's a good segue to my last question. And you spend the last part of your part of the book talking about a kinder and distinctly Canadian capitalism. So you kind of talk about your philosophy and your thinking around that. So share that with us, because it's you've talked about it in the media, and there's lots going on around relations between vendors and retailers. That's an ongoing dynamic, but you've got some of your own perspectives that you share in the book, and talk about that a little bit. Yeah, I think there's two sides to this. One is that business today does not resemble business when I was coming up.
which was almost shareholders only. And I'm not saying shareholders are important; they're incredibly important. But it was shareholders only, and maximize profit, and do everything under the law and all that. And it's not like that anymore. And I think and I know that the leaders I speak to, we don't talk about how much EPS they had or what their cash flow was. We talk about issues like sustainability. We talk about DE&I. We talk about how to treat teammates, and also you want successful companies that make a lot of money so they can hire Canadians, spend money, and give to philanthropic causes. So there's the two sides are we want really kinder companies that are incredibly successful. And I think those two things actually will go together if they don't already. But then on the other side, I see a demonization in some ranks of politicians or the media or other commentators, which have no basis, in fact, about how companies can carry themselves. But they make points and they get some readers. But I think it's very, very damaging. And I think that most jobs and most of the pensions people rely on and how they afford houses and to send their kids to school and afford to put money in a tank of gas when it can cost $200 today. That if the companies are helping and can help, and companies don't do everything perfectly. I'm not going to be hoist on that petard, but I do believe that this demonization is very, very nasty and very bad and destructive. And that goes back to my regret, which is let's unify instead of destroy, while at the same time holding each other accountable. I'm pretty strong on this. I saw that the capitalism I see today, although not perfect, can head in the right direction, okay? But it doesn't bear any resemblance to some of the speaking points that people like to use. And I've been around the block. I'm not naive. I know what goes on. I mean, it can be damaging. It can be very damaging.
I mean, there is some narrative around, grocers had some great results, great sales through hard work because, the food service business had shut down, and that resulted in a bunch of things. And I think we continue to see that narrative play out in terms of everything from compensation to, profits, right? And you read about that every day almost in the paper. So that it seems. Yeah,
and I think and some of it's good argument. And we should talk about it. We should talk about how Canadians are compensated, and we should talk about inflation, and we should talk about supply chain snafus, and we should hold each other accountable. And I can tell you, I hold myself and our group accountable. At the same time, to simplify it to a place where you knowingly aren't putting the facts out there it doesn't help Canadians, and I think that we need great, ethical, law-abiding, socially conscious companies, and that makes up a great employer and makes up a big part of our economy in our country. But I just don't. I don't like. I try not to slander others, so I don't like when whole businesses are slandered. So
I think the last point. I mean, as you craft this within your organization and steer your organization, not everyone may play by the same sense of rules of capitalism beyond the legal limits. Are you experiencing some of that, or what's your forecast of that? There's a lot of energy around vendor relationships these days. So how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, and I reserve the right to say whatever's on my mind, so I did. And and I saw at the beginning of COVID, especially, and then for 2 years, I saw what most people call vendors. I call supplier partners. And our who transports the goods. I saw them step up and partner with us in a way that I'd never seen before, and I found it off-putting. To put it mildly, that the minute that things looked like they were going to normalize, and by the way, they weren't normalized.
Still not.
That there was again the rancor continued between the supplier partners and retailers. And I'm all for driving a hard bargain. I'm a believer in business principles.
Yeah.
But I also believe that you got to make the pie better, and by trying to hurt every stage of the supply chain other than yourself, including farmers, families, transportation companies, mom and pops, and especially our great supplier partners. It is not good for the industry, and it puts a black eye on us. And so, unfortunately, I think unfortunately, because we can't govern ourselves without some rules, we need some rules put in place where we can negotiate and be tough but fair, but that people are treated with respect and given notice of changes rather than bully tactics, which I'm not crazy about in any way, shape, or form.
Well, it's an interesting time. Supply challenges are certainly not over. COVID's not over, so the challenges continue. But thanks so much for joining me on the podcast. I mean, the book, once again, is unprecedented. Canada's top CEOs on leadership during COVID. You've got a chapter in that, as do many of your colleagues. Michael, great to speak with you. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast and sharing your insights. And it was great to hear your voice and catch up as well.
Thank you. Very enjoyable. Appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning into this special episode of The Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, be sure and click and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically twice a week. And check out my other retail industry media properties, the Remarkable Retail Podcast, Conversations with Commerce Next podcast, and the Food Professor podcast with Dr. Sylvain Charlebois. Last but not least, if you're into barbecue, check out my all-new YouTube barbecue show, Last Request Barbecue, with new episodes each and every week. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, president of M.E. LeBlanc Company and Maven Media. And if you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website at meleblanc.co. Have a safe week, everyone.